Hey, thanks for having me on, Alex. Good to be here. I think this film is most important because if you want to know why Christians are asleep right now, if you want to know why the vast majority of Christians don't want to hear about the New World Order, they don't care when you warn them about global government or police state, it's because of this doctrine. This pre-trib rapture doctrine makes everybody believe that it doesn't really matter what's going on because we're all going to be out of here. And there was a pastor in Arizona that I know who recently said to me, as soon as he found out that I didn't believe in this pre-tribulation rapture, he said, well, now I understand why you're so paranoid about government. Because he'd seen all the stuff with the
that's sick that they don't care about, even if they were going to be teleported out. Don't they care about all the people now? No, they don't. They sit around at country clubs.
Yeah, so he said, now I see why you're so paranoid about government, but I'd like to turn that around on him and say, now I see why you don't give a rip about anything that's going on. Now I see why you trust the government so much, because you believe this fairy tale that we're going to be taken out of here.
I don't give anybody their rights. Our rights come from God. And if they're endowed by the Creator, then it doesn't matter what country you're a citizen of, you have the right to be free, period. But let me tell you something. I bet everybody in here believes in the First Amendment and thinks that's important. I bet you every single person in here thinks the freedom of religion is important. I'll bet you every single person who's here thinks that the freedom of speech is important. And yet, if they can take away the Eighth Amendment and say it doesn't mean anything, if they can take away the Fourth Amendment and search you without a warrant, if they can take away the Fifth Amendment and force you to be interrogated and answer questions, if they can take away the Second Amendment and infringe upon your right to keep and bear arms. But let me tell you something. If the Second doesn't matter, the Fourth doesn't matter, the Fifth doesn't matter, the Eighth doesn't matter, mark it down, the First Amendment will be gone. It'll be gone.
You know, there are people right now who basically think that they're qualified to rule this world and, create a global government where basically they call the shots and put an end to all the different nation states and have a one world government, the New World Order, right?
Yeah.
Now, are these good people or bad people?
I think that sounds like a good plan to me.
Evil people, they love to gravitate toward these positions where they get all this glory and where they can play God and manipulate people. I personally, am libertarian leaning in my political views, and the most totalitarian and authoritarian governments throughout history have been the most screwed up places. And the place where there was the most freedom were the places where things went well. But here's the problem with this global government. When it goes bad, there's nowhere to go. Think about that. You got nowhere to flee to. Why did our ancestors come over to the United States in the first place? To get out of Europe. They didn't like the way things were going over there. They wanted freedom. They wanted to start over somewhere. Well, if everybody's under the same government and it goes bad, which it inevitably will, like every government always goes bad, well, then there's nowhere to go. You're stuck in it. It becomes a prison planet. And here's the thing, when the government tries to stop that stuff, it gets worse. Because you're like, man, we got to step in and fix this. Okay, what about when the government steps in and wants to end the drug problem? What do? Make it worse? Oh, we're going to stop crime. They make it worse.
I have to agree with you on that one. But I do want a big
The war on drugs is a failure. So the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and people have we're going to end poverty, we're going to end suffering, and they end up creating more poverty, more suffering.
Yeah.
Look how it backfires. They make drugs illegal, more people are on drugs.
That the word sorcery in Greek is pharmakeia. Did you know that? Because a lot of manipulating and controlling other people is done through drugs. Go to the drug dealer on the street corner. He doesn't just sell a product. He is manipulating people, right? Many times they'll have prostitutes that are being manipulated through drugs. Go into the legalized drugs. We've got doctors and psychiatrists who are getting people hooked on drugs for financial gain. They will get you hooked on drugs. They'll get your kids hooked on drugs. Your kid acts up in school. He doesn't want to sit still all day. He wants to go out and play or whatever. And so what do? They put him on dope. They put him on Ritalin. But why? Why do they put the kid on Ritalin? Because they want him to think like they think, act like they act, believe what they believe, and just mindlessly take whatever's taught to them in that school. That's why. And you know what? What's taught in the school, half of it's wrong anyway.
That's right. Amen.
If I was down there, they'd want to put me on Ritalin. Not the things that most people think of that are the most dangerous part of television. Most people think of like, well, this is the worst part about television, the cussing, right? The cussing. Or they'll say the nudity, right? And those are the two things that, you know, the ratings, the PG, the PG-13, the R, pretty much based on those two things, right? Or maybe violence. You know, violence, nudity, cussing. You know, and that's the big thing that's wrong with TV. But I really think that those three things are probably, I mean, I know those are bad, don't get me wrong. I think that that's probably the least problem with television. I'll tell you what's the worst part about television is the programming, the philosophy, okay? I mean, the manipulating of your mind, the philosophy, the mentality, the system of thinking, the ideology. That's what's wrong with television. That's what's wrong with movies. That's where they're really getting in your head.
And so when the Bible's saying, gird up the loins of your mind and be sober, what's he saying? Take control of your mind. And watch this. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed. How are we going to get transformed? How are we not going to be conformed to this world? By the renewing of your mind. It starts in your brain. It starts in your mind. You got to push a reset button in your mind. You've got to tighten that thing up. You got to take the reins of your mind. You got to gird up the loins of your mind and decide, I'm not just going to think about whatever the world tells me to think about. I'm going to decide what I think about. Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. Amen. I'm going to decide what I think about. I'm going to gird up the loins of my mind. I'm not just going to be this passive, conduit for the world's garbage to just control my mind. Right. Now, what is that talking about, the evil day? That evil day is going to be different for everybody, okay? The evil day is just that day in your life where everything goes bad, everything comes down at the same time, all hell breaks loose, or all the enemies attack you, or you're just at the lowest point you've ever been spiritually, or someone that you love turns on you. The last word of verse 13, the first word of verse 14, is just like stand, 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 stand. Right? We don't need to be backing down in 2018. We don't need to get in the midst of a fight, in the midst of an attack, in the midst of persecution, and just compromise, give in, back down, retreat, run away. No. We need to stand our ground. Or, you maybe have some things in your life that you had to get rid of, some sin that you got out of your life. Stand on that. Don't let the devil reclaim that ground in your life. Stand and don't back down on those things. Now, in order to understand the New World Order, we have to understand the subject of Babylon in the Bible. Babylon is a place that's mentioned hundreds of times. And if we go all the way to the beginning, we actually go to a place that's just called Babel.
The name Babylon seems to come from the Tower of Babel, and we use the word Babel like he's a babbling idiot, he's talking incoherently, because that's where God confused the languages.
The Tower of Babel was the first attempt by evil men to usurp the authority of God and to become a godlike state unto themselves.
Tower of Babel is probably the first post-flood attempt at a one-world government. God said, spread out. Nimrod said, oh no, we're staying here. And God stepped in and broke it up by confusing the languages.
I think that a lot of Christians, when they think about Babylon the Great, and they think about, the old Roman Empire, in their minds, that's where it stops. They don't think about the spirit of Babylon being alive and well today.
Is that spirit of Babylon, and the Bible says that the whore sitteth upon many waters. Then later in chapter 17 he says, the waters which thou sawest where the whore sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So this spirit of Babylon is not restricted to one geographic location, but the whore sits upon many waters.
You would see the center of globalist power not as being Babylon, but as being in Shushan. Obviously, Rome is a completely different geographic location than Babylon, but it's part of the same system, the same spirit, the same idea of Babylon is continued on. The Bible says, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against what? Principalities and powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world,
against spiritual wickedness in high places. God is telling us in the New Testament that there is a spiritual battle going on, a spiritual wrestling, and that wrestling is with principalities. It's with powers. Who are these principalities? They are the rulers of the darkness of this world. They are and represent spiritual wickedness in high places. Now, where are we going with this? Whether it's Babylon or Persia or Grecia or whether it's the Roman Empire, it is demonic. There are demons that are behind these leaders. There are devils that are actually calling the shots and actually motivating this globalist conquest. And the Bible even says, if you flip over to Ephesians chapter 2, he talks about those that are not saved in verse 1, and you hath he quickened who were dead in trespasses and sins, wherein in time past ye walked according to the course of this world, according to the what? The prince. Satan is called the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. There was a spirit at work in Babylon, a spirit at work with Persia and the Greeks and with the Romans. That same spirit and demonic influence was present in all of these empires. In Revelation 17 and 18, when God is talking in the end times about Babylon, we know he's not talking about the literal city of Babylon because that city no longer exists. It's just a ruin now. Not a single person lives there. So he's using the term Babylon to refer to a different nation. Why? Because it's a nation that's like Babylon. Just like in the book of Isaiah, when he called the nation of Judah Sodom, and he said, listen, you rulers of Sodom. He's talking to the rulers of Judah. Why? Because they had become like unto Sodom. They had a lot of the same attributes, a lot of the same perversion and abominations that Sodom had. So whoever God's referring to as Babylon in the book of Revelation would be a nation that is like Babylon.
That the 10 kings are the ones that are going to burn Babylon with fire. So when we read in chapter 18 about Babylon being burned with fire and being made desolate, who's doing it according to the Bible? The 10 kings, which have one mind with who? Who are they united with? Do they have different views from the Antichrist? Are they kind of doing their own thing and the Antichrist is doing his thing? No. These have one mind. They give him his power and his strength. He rules by their permission. They hate the whore. So who is it that's going to destroy Babylon? According to the Bible here, it's the 10 kings. The coalition of 10 kings will destroy Babylon. And when the Antichrist is done with the United States, you know what he's going to do? Discard it. But they'll use the whore to get in power. Why? Because how can the Antichrist get in power without the military might of the United States? How can the Antichrist get in power without our technology, without our infrastructure of world government?